Great. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about allergies, which this is the perfect time of year to do because it's just gorgeous outside, but it also means that it comes with a lot of blooming that's happening. So we are going to jump right in today because once again, lots of info. And I am Dr. Molly Force. I'm the clinical director at Prosper Natural Health, and I work with two wonderful physicians, Dr. Rosalie and Dr. Mary. Dr. Rosalie will be joining me in just a few minutes. She's just finishing up with a patient right now, and both come with an amazing skill set that I feel like really rounds out our naturopathic practice. Dr. Rosalie specializes in Ayurvedic medicine, so East Indian medicine, and Dr. Mary specializes in traditional Chinese medicine. So she also has an acupuncture degree as well. So towards the end, we're going to really want to talk about ways that we can think more than just the Western approach when we're thinking about natural approaches to allergies. So we want you guys to understand the physiology behind allergies because so much of addressing imbalances naturally comes down to understanding what it is that the body is trying to accomplish when it's sending us these signs or symptoms of imbalance. So what we see a lot of times is we'll see our mucous membranes try to be excreting things. So that's why we see the runny eyes and the runny nose, sometimes a lot of watering of our eyes, and we can also get sneezing. And that's our body really trying to expel those allergens. Now, we can also have headaches and some imbalances that happen in regards to our cognitive abilities. We can become very fatigued whenever we're dealing with this immune response of allergies. And we have something that we call the atopic triad, which is hay fever, asthma, and eczema. And this is something that we see whenever we have allergies that go unaddressed, and we can begin to see issues with our skin as well as our lungs. So when we're talking about allergies, we're going to be thinking a lot about our eliminatory organs today and how they can be impacted. And of course, right now we've got huge release of these beautiful flowers with the blooms, the pollen, but also the trees are really releasing quite a bit of pollen right now as well. So as far as allergies go, one piece that we always have to cover right at the very beginning when we're thinking about this as physicians is anaphylaxis. And many know what that is. There are several different symptoms with anaphylaxis, and often we think of the throat swelling and itchiness, maybe of the lips, inability to breathe, so that shortness of breath and the wheezing. But we also want to remember that anaphylaxis can present with abdominal issues as well, nausea, vomiting, stomach pain, and there can be this sense of impending doom that people have when they have anaphylaxis. So this is one of the worst types of allergic reactions that we can have, and we have to take these very seriously. And as we start to have more and more serious allergies, they naturally will progress to become more severe. So if you have anaphylaxis once, your chance of having it again and it being more severe the next time is greater. And we're going to talk about why that is here when we're thinking about the cellular biology of this. So with allergies, we have this hypersensitivity, which is regulated by IgE. Now this gets a little bit dry here, but stick with me because we're going to be talking about sensitivities as well today. And so that's the things like IgA and IgG. So these are different immunoglobulins in the body. So IgE is what we're discussing when we're talking about a true allergy. So what happens is we have this protein allergen and it gets presented by our cells and we begin to make antibodies against this antigen. And as that happens, we get more and more of these cells called in, and we get this mast cell, which will come and it releases these histamine packets. And these histamine packets are called vasoactive amines. And what that means is that it affects our dilation. And we can see over here on the right-hand side that there are several different areas and tissues in the body that get affected by these. So smooth muscle, and that can affect our ability to breathe. Our blood capillaries are affected. The mucosal lining, so that's why we often will get like that runny, mucus that's produced. Our platelets can be affected, and we also have other sensory nerve organs, which can be affected as well. So it can be a pretty intensive process that happens just from this little cellular reaction. And once we have this tagging of that IgE type of antibody, the body memorizes it. It learns the cellular reaction, and it will make a quicker response the next time it's seen. So the classic example is the kid that gets a hold of a peanut, and the first time maybe they have some swelling of their lips, but the next time they have that IgE reaction, it's more intense, and they can have full-blown anaphylaxis with difficulty swallowing and breathing. So it can be life-threatening, it can be very serious. So when we think of allergies, we're really thinking of these IgE reactions, and they're usually very acute, which means they're immediate, they're quick. And this is a big deal because they are something that can just really change the course of someone's day very quickly. So one of the ways that we're testing for this is by the traditional skin prick or scratch test, where we're putting a small amount of that protein, that antigen that we're suspecting to be a problem, in underneath the skin, and then watching for this inflammatory reaction, that histamine packet, to be released by these mast cells. So you can see this example on this person's back here, where they put little dots right next to where they did the injections of the antigens of these proteins. And they're looking to see what's called a wheal. So that swelling reaction is called a wheal, that little blister-like bump. And the more intense the wheal is, the larger the size is, they can grade how severe that allergic reaction is, that IgE reaction. Now, we can also do antibody antigen reaction testing through simple blood draws. So that's looking at the serum of the blood and looking for how intensely those antigens are reacting when they wash the blood over a protein set. So they look to see how many IgE antibodies tag to that. And so they can also quantify it that way. So once again, the takeaway from this is IgE is really that quick, more intense reaction that can happen. Now, the differentiation here, the important piece here, is that we also have IgG and IgA and IgM. So when we're talking about true allergies, once again, and when we're thinking about allergies that, for example, are from foods, we often think about things like peanuts, shellfish, strawberries, almonds, eggs. Artificial dyes are known to be a high allergen, and tomatoes. So those are the ones that are considered to be the highest out of all of them. So let's see if I see Dr. Rosalie's joining, so I'm just gonna quickly make her a host here. So as far as sensitivities go, once again, these are different than the IgE. They can be less immediate. So that's a big deal, because we might eat a food or get in contact with an environmental protein that can cause an immune reaction that's not a true allergy, and it can be hidden, so it can be delayed. So it doesn't mean it's not affecting you, it just is a different type of immune reaction that's not technically a true allergen. So we have the ability to test that as well, and that's typically done through blood testing again. So once again, they're putting the antigen, these proteins, on these little plates, on these wells, and then they're putting the serum blood onto those plates and looking for how many antibody, antigen, protein pairing reactions there are to know how severe that is. So IgA, lines our mucous membrane. So that means everything from your nose, your eyes, your mouth, all the way down the intestinal system and vaginal tract as well. All of those are being monitored by our immunoglobulin A. IgG is considered a more chronic, slower reaction to happen. So once we come in contact with a protein, our immune system can make this IgE antibody. And this is one of the things that we think about whenever we come back in contact with the same bacteria or virus, for example. Often we will have those IgEs, which are showing our body's recognition of those, which help us get through that infection quicker, for example. IgM is considered a more immediate reactor, and that's something that will go up typically right after the exposure to that protein, whether it be, once again, bacterial, viral, environmental, or food. So those are our different ways of looking at those sensitivities. So if you're having issues with foods, it's a really important thing for us to just take a step back and say, wait a second, there's something going on with our immune balance here. There's something going on here with our intestinal system. And most likely we need to work on our gut to get it back in balance. So today we wanted to go through with you guys what you can do. How can you actually support your body to be stronger when it comes to mitigating and decreasing allergic reactions? Oftentimes we find, especially with environmental allergens, it can be really hard to take us out of those scenarios where we're going to be exposed. Like right now, there's just so much pollen, and we want to be able to be outside. It's really important for our mental health and our physical health to be outside. So how do we do that in a safe way and not have our immune system be completely out of balance? So we're going to go through these 4 general hacks and tips within those. And Dr. Rosalie's here now, so we're going to split these up as we go through. So the first one is, sounds easier sometimes than it is, and that's reducing the allergen exposure. So we're going to go over ways to do that. We also, of course, want to really support our cleansing organs. We've already talked today just about some of the cleansing organs and the mucous membranes and how important those are for moving protein invaders out. So those antigens that our body is reacting to. Really, we want to also be able to correct the immune response. And that's the name of the game. That's where naturopathic medicine, I think, really shines. And then addressing inflammation as we go through as well. So Dr. Rosalie, maybe I'll let you take it from here.
Sure thing. Hi all, Dr. Rosalie here. And so that first hack is addressing the allergens. So the first piece here is we've got to check in on what is the air quality in our homes, the place, and honestly also the places that we frequent the most. Some of us are at work quite often. A lot of us are at home more often than not. So the air quality actually is quite important in terms of making sure that there's no allergens in your home that are contributing to potential inflammation. So we're talking about pollens that come in from the outdoors. We're talking about molds that might be inside. And so to avoid pollen exposure, the best thing to do is to actually stay indoors with the windows closed during high pollen count days. It's something that if you're unsure how to look for high pollens, it's a quick Google search, honestly, and it links you to your local area and what the pollen counts are currently. We're sort of dealing with tree pollens right now, and so some of us are more sensitive to those. And some of us are more sensitive to the grasses that came out a few months ago now. Air purifiers like HEPA filters will help with cleaning out those particles and leading to clearer air in the spaces you frequent the most. For my high allergy patients, I recommend honestly that they have a HEPA filter in their bedrooms because they're spending easily 12 hours a day in those areas. Masks will help as well, especially for folks who have asthma and hay fever, because it's just an extra filter against those allergens. Something that also happens is that our body picks up these little particles that hang around. And if we're able to wash our hair and our body and our face before bed, then we're not taking those into bed where we hang out for sometimes 10 hours a day, right? Laundering pillowcases is another way to sort of make sure that the allergens aren't hanging out in a place we're breathing them in often. Nasal passage rinsing with the neti pot is also so important in that the water mechanically moves the allergens out of the way and into the, away because it goes out the other side. And that's something that you can do either with a neti pot or with a spray, like a saline spray. Some people who have deviated septums or really inflamed nasal passages have a hard time with this. So I often sometimes recommend steam inhalations with just hot water and essential oils for those types of people.
Dr. Rosalie, do you want to mention what types of essential oils might be your favorite for that kind of thing? Because some, of course, can be a little more irritating than others.
Sure enough. Yeah, I like to actually go in and think about our mint family plants. So I like all the different types of mints. Thyme can also be really helpful and antiviral, or something soothing and relaxing like eucalyptus or even lavender.
Wonderful.
So the next piece here in reducing the allergen exposure is to pinpoint molds. And this is a big problem in the Pacific Northwest where we are. It's just so humid all the time, and molds really like to grow in our indoor spaces. Carpets, especially under carpets, accumulate mold. So if you haven't lifted up the sides of your carpets recently, just make sure to check there's nothing growing under there. That's a silent way, it's a silent inflammatory molecule that can be very irritating. Windowsills will also will show us signs of molds because there's a lot of condensation on the windows, and towards the bottom is where all that condensation builds up. If it's building up on the windowsills, you know that it's present in the rest of the house. Bathrooms, which end up dealing with a lot of humidity, are also great places to look, check in all the corners. If you have any musty smell whatsoever, it means that there's molds. Some other big problem areas are our vents and our duct systems, especially if you have an AC unit that brings out air into the house. That also is a spot where condensation builds. And imagine that you haven't used it because it's been there all summer, and the instant you put it back on in the fall, you're mobilizing all of those mold spores. So it's just worth doing some deep cleaning and some looking in those areas that often go underlooked. Closets are another spot where mold can build up, and in your cars as well, surprisingly enough. Sometimes patients will even know for themselves, oh yeah, every time I'm in my car, I sneeze, or I have these hay fever symptoms. So it's worth just giving a deep look in all of these areas. Another way to reduce allergens is from the food perspective. So a lot of us have what are known as food sensitivities, okay? Some of us have food allergies, which are true sort of allergic reactions, like the ones to peanuts, right? You eat a peanut and you get hives or even throat swelling, right? That's sort of signs of true allergies and anaphylaxis. Obviously, those need to be identified. You probably already know them for yourself already. The other piece here is our food sensitivities. A lot of foods are actually contribute to inflammation because the body mounts an immune response to them. It's not the anaphylaxis one, but it's one that's similar, and it's leads to inflammation. Okay, so that's something worth avoiding. It's our food sensitivities. and also histamine-rich foods, which will, in a couple slides, we'll go through what those are. But histamines, if you know that word, it's probably from the antihistamines, the over-the-counter pills that we take, like the Claritin during allergy season. Foods can actually increase histamines, which are inflammatory molecules in the body. Okay, and we'll go through what specific foods those are later, but we're generally thinking about our fermented foods and our processed meats most specifically. And then lastly, the animal allergens, which sort of fits in with the food sensitivity piece. So our low histamine diet is especially helpful. This is something I recommend to a lot of patients who have either asthma or eczema or seasonal allergies. This is really helpful for them. Sometimes my migraine patients who have chronic migraines, which is a sign of inflammation, can do really well on a low histamine diet as well. Okay, so histamine intolerance occurs when, your cup is too full. If your cup of water is equivalent to your health, and that drop on top is just allows it to spill over and end up with these symptoms. A low histamine diet will sort of help with preventing that cup from spilling over. Okay, there's histamine present in almost every food, though most are low histamine and some are high histamine. So it's worth just navigating on the daily basis, knowing what your levels are there. If foods are left out for longer, like leftovers, like fermented foods, they are typically higher in histamine. Okay, and the enzymes in the body, if we want to get real scientific here, that break down these histamines are the DAO and the HMNT. Okay, some people have genetic difficulty with that. Other people are totally normal. So yeah, the takeaway here is low histamine diet avoids foods that are typically naturally high in histamines. So here's our list of high histamine foods. Like I mentioned, leftovers, our fermented things, alcohols, aged cheeses, right? We've got that nice tasty blue cheese, but it's high in histamine, okay? Fermented foods, especially if they've been sitting on the shelf of a grocery store for many, many months. For my histamine sensitive patients, I have them remove all ferments, or if they want to get creative, then they can make ferments at home, but they've got to be very fresh. Okay, they can't be sitting in the fridge for 3 months, or have their canned dilly beans 5 months later. Okay, vinegars, again, a ferment, as well as smoked foods and meats. So our meat sticks, even though they're delicious, are especially high in histamine. So that's worth pulling away if you're more allergic, have more allergies. Again, canned fish, legumes, and peanuts are ones that can also increase histamine. When we think of these types of foods, it's interesting also because we think of people who have allergies to them, right? So sometimes that's a marker. If you're unsure in the grocery store what's a high histamine food, think about the high allergy foods for people. Citrus fruits, as well as bananas, avocados, right? Those are same family as latex, right? So we know that latex can cause an allergy. Spinach, tomatoes, eggplants, we're talking about our nightshades here, okay? Very salty foods, anything that's with preservatives is also going to boost your histamine. From the Ayurvedic perspective, which is traditional Indian medicine, salty is heating, okay? So this makes sense on an energetic perspective. If you're adding more heat, you're gonna have more inflammation. Chocolate and cacao, as well as our very delicious high heat spices like chili powder, cinnamon, and cloves.
So I love this idea of, really considering what it is that's coming into your body, trying to reduce it. And one of the pieces here, of course, it's so important, is not just trying to take less of those inflammatory, high histamine sort of reactivity foods and environmental exposures in, but also making sure that what does come in can be processed out. So we want to be thinking about supporting our cleansing organs. For those of you who missed our talk last month, we released a program that's a holistic detox and cleanse. So make sure you check that out. It's available on our website. It's under our programs list. And what it does is it allows you to go in at your own pace and work through a 14-day cleanse where we're really focusing on clean eating and some lifestyle modifications. And it gives you recipes and shopping lists and stuff like that. So when we're thinking about those cleansing organs, we really talked about this a lot last month. We want to focus on the liver, which is processing so many of our chemicals in our body, including our hormones. We want to think about our kidneys, which are eliminating those water wastes through the body. We want to think about our lungs as they're doing our exchange with all of our air and all the chemicals which are in that air, our lymphatic system, which runs right underneath our blood vessels. And this is really like the highway for your immune cells. So it's a really important one when we're thinking about managing the immune system and inflammation at the same time. And that's essentially what we're thinking about with allergies, especially. And then we want to think about the colon, of course, because that's our solid waste, move it out sort of thing. And then skin, as you saw in that picture where on the person's back, IgE, was written, and that hypergraphia. So that's a histamine response right there on someone's skin. Maybe you guys have seen that or experienced it yourself for the people who you can just touch and they'll inflame in red in that area. So that's a very high histamine response that they're showing where their mast cells are releasing those packets. And our skin is such an important eliminatory organ to move things out. It's a very large surface area. So one of the first things we want to consider is, are you drinking enough water? It's so simple, but it makes such a big difference to have that water available to help it's helping those kidneys do that flush, but also your skin. It's keeping your circulation hydrated enough so that you can mobilize these inflammatory components and get them out of the body. We want to think about the food that's coming in, and we touched on the Dirty Dozen. Now, the Environmental Working Group just released the 2021 list of those, so make sure you guys check out that list of the Dirty Dozen foods. And those are the foods that we know are going to be higher in our toxic chemicals and our pesticides, fungicides, those kind of things, which are so very damaging to our organs of elimination and make it harder. So once again, these are all things that are filling up that proverbial inflammatory cup. And once it starts to overflow, we start to see those imbalances of our immune system as signs and often in signs of allergic response. Hydrotherapy is one of my very favorites. And this is, goes beyond just the drinking of the water. When we're thinking drinking of the water, we also wanted to just point out the general rule there is about half of your body weight in ounces. There are a few caveats with this for people with severe kidney damage, but typically we're really wanting to get more than just, the standard recommendation of 8 glasses a day. So for a lot of people, so if you can imagine, if you're 150 pounds, half of that weight would be about 75 ounces. So that's a little more than your 8 ounce cups a day. We already talked about the nasal lavage and how important just cleaning those pollens and those chemicals that are antigens that are irritating and inflammatory out are. So that's that beautiful neti pot. And there's a lovely picture of somebody running that water through their nasal passages. A cold cloth to the forehead is a very simple one that can calm someone down who's going through an inflammatory allergic response. And this goes back to what Dr. Rosalie was talking about in regards to this inflammation being a heating event. If we think about it from the traditional medical systems, so we want to kind of cool things down, calm things down. There's on the opposite end of that doing heating foot baths for some people can actually stimulate circulation from those extremities when we're dealing with stagnant lymphatic systems. So that's not for treatment in the immediate allergic reaction, especially, but that would be something that may help stimulate lymph flow and help the eliminatory organs. Contrast hydrotherapy showers. I love this idea that we are in the shower and we have this beautiful period of time of vasodilation. So the heat is making your blood vessels expand. And then if we were to switch that to a cooler spray at the very end of the shower, then we get a beautiful vasoconstriction and a rebound vasodilation as we get out of the shower and dry off. And that pumping action that happens is very, very important for our extracellular fluids to move things through. We also have the ability to do those steam inhalations. That can be a beautiful thing, especially when we're really inflamed up in our sinuses. And we already kind of mentioned some of the aromatherapy that can be paired with that as well. So here they are right now. One of my favorite flowers that has, is a fun one. It's kind of a challenging one for some. They don't like dandelions in their yard, but it's such a beautiful sunshiny flower, and it provides for us a lot of really wonderful support for our eliminatory organs, specifically our kidneys in the leaf part. And then in the root part, we think of it being more supportive for our liver. So this is a great time of year to collect your dandelion, if you can, before it goes to its full seed. And you can pull out the whole plant and utilize the whole plant if you dry it. And once again, you can combine it or separate the leaves and make tea with the leaves separate from the root. The root, both are pretty darn bitter, but you can use dandelion greens in things like pancakes and in muffins and in your cooking and also in your salads. So just don't use too much because you might get a little bit of loose stool. But remember, even though these are kind of annoying in your yard sometimes because they can take over, they are good because they're good pollinators too. They're good food for the early pollinators. So getting into our third hack, I'll let you take that away, Dr. Rosalie.
Yeah, so the third hack for combating allergies is to correct the immune response. So this is a really interesting concept that also in terms of the COVID literature has been coming up recently. Our body has two ways that it responds to triggers, okay? And this is our immune response. One of the ways is known as Th1. That's just a word that describes which types of immune cells are being stimulated. And in other ways, Th2, okay, different type of immune cell is stimulated. It actually lives in a balance here. So the ideal immune response has a good, healthy amount of both the Th1 and the Th2. In someone who tends towards allergies, what's been found is that they tend towards having a Th2 dominant response, okay? Which means that the body, the immune cells, differentiate into a high allergy type of state, okay? And these immune cells will pump out what are known as inflammagens or types of cytokines, which are markers that increase inflammation in the body and lead to those allergy types symptoms that we have. Th1, on the other hand, if that was elevated, you would have more autoimmune picture happening. That's a different type of immune cell that's being created. So Th2 happens in allergies. How can we regulate this seesaw here? And some of the good ways to regulate that is to help with the gut microflora, all right? 70% of our immune system is in the gut, okay? That's why we've got to make sure that the GI tract is not inflamed as well. Otherwise, we're likely to have whole body inflammation and allergic symptoms. Probiotics, especially a nice biodiversity of them, including both many types of different bacteria, but also some healthy yeasts, will lead to that nice biodiversity of microflora and help decrease that Th2 dominant response. Fish oil is generally anti-inflammatory, right? The omega-3s in our diet are going to decrease those inflammatory cytokines, okay? Vitamin D is also, we've heard about it a ton amidst this pandemic for helping with the immune system. So the reason is here, it is immune supportive, and it also is the case here with allergies. And then lastly, something that's going to help with balancing the Th1 and Th2 responses is lymph movement, which in general just involves circulation as well. Okay, we've got to make sure that we're circulating the blood in the body, but we're also removing the toxins that end up in the extracellular fluid. Things like our hot cold showers are going to help, especially with that. So that's something I would recommend we all do. Finish our showers on a little bit of a cold stream for 30 seconds if you can do it. That's going to help with your immune system and your lymph drainage. So probiotics, I already talked a bit about these. The digestive bacteria are going to help with digesting and assimilating the foods. If there's a nice biodiversity, there's going to be low inflammation in the gut, okay? Prebiotics are also very important. They end up feeding the healthy and good probiotics, all right? These are a type of molecule known as fructooligosaccharides, and they're found in very specific foods like chickpeas, like chicory root, and things like sunchokes or Jerusalem artichokes, as well as our spices, things like our Italian blend, right? All of these are prebiotics to feed our healthy and diverse family of microflora, all right? 70% immune system in the digestive tract, so we need a healthy immune system there if we're going to have a healthy systemic immune system. Some of the supplements that we carry here are a line that has been vetted for quality, and there's different sub probiotics here in different amounts of which bacteria are present, etc. And yeah, it's something that you'd need to discuss specifically with your doctor before starting on an intensive probiotic capsule.
One of the things that we like about the HLC and the HMF line is they have actually had double-blind placebo studies done on that line, looking at that, reducing the Th2 pathway. So it's pretty cool in regards for our allergy patients. We know so much of that immune response is tied up in probiotics and what your flora is. And so if we can begin to help them shift that balance by making sure they have the right subtypes of human specific probiotics, then we love to do that.
So here's another great way to get some lymph moving energy in your life. And cleavers are all over the place here in the Pacific Northwest. They're a crawly vine. If you've gone hiking, maybe it's gotten stuck on your pant legs. So cleavers are what are known as a lymphagogue, which is just a fancy term in the herbal world that means lymph, and gog, which means movement. All right, we're helping move the lymph, which is one of our detoxifying systems. Cleavers also contain flavonoids, which in specific includes quercetin, which we know is a mast cell stabilizer, which is a type of immune cell that pumps out histamine. So basically, this is an antihistamine plant, okay? It's edible, and you can make fresh tea with it, or you can cold infuse it, and you sort of have more of a iced herbal tea, and it pulls out a different set of constituents that way. You can make some homemade vinegars from that perspective, so you've got medicinal food on board, or you can just juice it and add it to your smoothies, or make just a nice fresh juice with a little bit of honey, which will be especially helpful if you're having an acute flare-up of your hay fever.
So let's talk about other ways to address inflammation. We know that inflammation is something that we can actually test. So some of our favorite ways to do that is through a blood test, because it gives us definitively as physicians an idea of how severe a person's inflammatory reactions are. And we know that histamines create an inflammatory reaction. And we know that when we add more inflammation to the body, we get an increase of this Th2 pathway, and we get more overall inflammation and allergy symptoms. So it's always nice to know for our patients how severely inflamed they are. So we do like to look at that blood work. We also like to do a review with them to make sure that we are addressing the histamines if that seems to be an issue. And the way we typically are doing that from the natural perspective is supporting the cells themselves that release those histamine packets to make them more stable. So those mast cells, if they break open and splay their contents, which is the histamine packets, then we have a high histamine reaction and we have a lot of allergic symptoms. So if we can get those mast cells themselves to be more stabilized by providing antioxidants like quercetin and a few others we're going to go over, that can be incredibly helpful. Now, we also like anti-inflammatory phytochemicals on board in general, because we know that reducing our overall inflammation is going to once again reduce our production of those Th2 cytokines and inflammation. We know that reducing general food sensitivities, so this isn't the IgE, the allergy side of things, but it's the IgA and the IgG and the IgM. So the more latent food sensitivity. So I drink the milk and then a few hours later, I get mucusy. The next day I get stuffy or I get congested ears or something like that. That is the delayed food sensitivity, the hidden food sensitivity. So we want to reduce those because those are causing inflammation too. And then the environmental allergens, which we talked about. And then we also know that if we can support our adrenals, then they modulate our cortisol levels. And cortisol is absolutely critical in playing a role with inflammation in the body. So as far as antihistamine foods, we kind of have covered those already, but remember that there are some superfoods out there that we know to be antihistamine. So it's not just about removing the foods that are high in histamine, but also looking at those foods that can be more stabilizing. So bromelain, which is a chemical many of you have heard of, is in pineapple, and that's a highly stabilizing phytochemical that we know is an antihistamine. We know that flax and chia are considered antihistamines, so including those, and they have those omega-3s, and we already talked about how omega-3s could be stabilizing for that Th2 system. We know that several of our cold water fish, like salmon, also have those omegas, and those are considered more stabilizing. There's an enzyme in papaya that's considered to be an antihistamine. And then several of our spices. Now, it's an interesting thing because our heating spices can be more problematic, but there are some of our colorful spices that can be more of an antihistamine antioxidant. So we think about like turmeric, for example, with that. So speaking of anti-inflammatory phytochemicals, top of the line for me is turmeric. The research is just so beautiful on this herb, and there's so much ancient wisdom in the use of it. Now, we can ingest the turmeric in our cooking, making sure that we're including it with a fat to help it absorb, or we can take pharmaceutical quantities of it, which to get those amounts, we usually have to bioconvert it first or pair it with something like black pepper. I'm always warning my patients to be careful of eating large amounts of turmeric with black pepper in their supplementation, because that can be very irritating to the intestinal lining, which we're often trying to work on healing. And the whole point of that black pepper is to irritate the lining so that the turmeric can get in. So I'm often looking for products for my patients that have already had that bioconversion done. So there's a brand line that has been trademarked called Mariva that does that. And then this Designs for Health, Curcumavale also has that. So turmeric being such a very strong anti-inflammatory and antioxidant, very calming to the inflammatory cascade. Astragalus being another really wonderful herb that we can use for this. Licorice, which you can, even incorporate as licorice tea. Remember, it kind of tastes more like fennel than what we think of like as black licorice. So we're not talking about the candy here. We're actually talking about the herb. That's considered to be a really nice anti-inflammatory that also modulates our cortisol system. So it's kind of an interesting way that it supports our adrenals in that response. Lemon balm, which is just growing so fast right now. If you have a lemon balm plant, just plant one and always have some kind of rockery or something around it, because it will just go and go and go. It's the gift that keeps on giving. And that's in that mint family. And that's something that you can easily use in tea or also in like your smoothies or something like that. And that's known to be very anti-inflammatory. And then we can't forget how important the beta glucans of our mushrooms are. So when we're thinking about our medicinal mushrooms, specifically maitake comes up as a high one for this very anti-inflammatory phytochemical when we're thinking about modulating inflammation for allergies. Our natural antihistamines, which I know many of you may have already tried, especially if you are interested in natural approaches to allergies, are things like our nettles, our quercetin, our citrus bioflavonoids, and our bromelain. Now, remember, we already talked about bromelain being in pineapple. Nettles, many of you here living in the Pacific Northwest are familiar with. They're also about knee-high at this point. We want to collect these nettles if we're going to, before they go into their full flowering stage. So now is like the perfect time, and even when they're a little bit shorter, earlier in the spring. Quercetin, we talked about, just mentioned it. It's a very strong antihistamine. So it's a very strong mast cell stabilizer. And we find that in onion skin. Whenever people use onion skin to dye Easter eggs, for example, because it dyes them kind of yellow, that's quercetin. That's the phytochemical that's doing that yellow coloring there. Citrus bioflavonoids, we know that not only do they stabilize the mast cells, but they also help with our capillaries of our blood vessels to make them less fragile. So they're less likely to burst. So when we're thinking about, once again, that release of inflammatory packets like histamine, we want to really be calming the system down. So two of our favorite formulations, which we use quite a bit with patients, Mountain Peaks Nutritionals makes Allergy Plus formula, which has nettles and quercetin and bromelain and your citrus bioflavonoids. And then there's also BCQ, which stands for bromelain. That's the B. The C is curcumin, which we talked about, which is the active ingredient in turmeric, and quercetin being the Q in that one. And that's a really beautiful combination. So quercetin, we can find it in more than just our onions, but I always like to remind people to keep your onion skins, if you can, put them in a freezer bag. And once that gets full, use it to make your broths or your soup stocks with, because that is a very and then you just strain it out. But that's a very powerful phytochemical that we're often just throwing in the trash that are in those skins. We want to just remind you guys that we've got a lot of different products that we offer through the Prosper Apothecary. Most of these are being recommended on an individual basis to our patients, but we want to have them there just because we've vetted them to know that they're really good quality physician grade products that we use. And this just shows a few of the different things that we'll use for regulating inflammation, including like that neti stick, for example, that helps kind of get things cleared out. So let's go back and touch on wildcrafting nettles. So remember, guys, if you're going to do this, wear gloves. It's really important because those little hairs on there, the stingers, actually inject little bits of serotonin and some other histamine reactive chemicals, and they can be very painful, at least temporarily. So those stingers are neutralized whenever they are physically broken off or cooked. So if the nettle itself is agitated while you're cooking it, that kind of breaks off those little hairs, those little injecting stingers. But it is the nettles themselves are natural antihistamines, which is pretty cool. And they're also full of a lot of minerals. So they are a great source of iron. And so we often will be recommending that people are either drying them or including them fresh in their food. I've had patients make like nettle lasagna and stuff like that. Or they're using them to make nettle pesto, or they're drinking them as a tea. So you can definitely make them into all kinds of really good soups and smoothies and things like that. So get creative with your nettles. This is the time of year to do that. I don't know how many of you guys have noticed this little herb, but it's very plentiful around here too. It grows almost like a little weed, and it's called the dead nettle. It has a little bit more of a purplish hue to it. But this is also, so this one's actually in a different family than the nettles. It's from the mint family, and you can tell that because it has a square stem. But you can eat the tops of this, even adding it to salad, or dry it and make it into a tea. Just not too much of it, kind of similar to dandelion. Too much could cause a little bit of looser stools, but this is another great antihistamine herb. Dr. Rosalie, you want to do the apple cider vinegar?
Yeah, this is a great and delicious trick here. It's mixing together apple cider vinegar with honey, and especially local honey, since local honeybees will use the local flowers, which can be very allergy provoking for a lot of people, but kind of help you digest them. You know, when we take in the allergen internally rather than through our respiratory tract, the body is able to deal with it a little bit better. And so this is just one of those ways, you know, 2 steps removed, where we're dealing with the local flora. So apple cider vinegar also is a way to extract the medicinal components from the honey, and help make it into something that's that you could take, you know, basically a shot of, or a tablespoon of, add it to either your smoothies or just straight, or into salad dressing even, and the recipe is right there for you.
And we always like to remind people not to leave this on their teeth. Also, we should say that some people who are having severe allergies, we don't start this for them later on in the year once their allergies are really going. And the reason for that is remember that this is a ferment, so it's technically higher in histamine. So when we're trying to reduce histamines, it's not usually something we're doing. But earlier on in the year, January, February, it could be potentially, depending on when your worst allergy season is, could be a good way to kind of start stimulating the immune system, getting in that raw local honey, getting in a circulation mover with that little bit of that cayenne and that apple cider vinegar. So the final piece here for reducing the inflammation is supporting those adrenals. And we already mentioned the adrenals. Remember, they sit right on top of your kidneys, and they're going to really regulate the amount of cortisol that's produced. And that's our chemical modulator of inflammation in the body. You guys have probably heard of steroids, and they're often used in severe allergies and severe allergic reactions to calm an inflammatory response down. So we know that our body's natural version of that is cortisol, and it's managing our inflammation levels. So we don't want too much and we don't want too little. We want, just the right amount. So one of the things that I always like to talk about with my allergy patients is, are you a night owl, or are you somebody who's a chipper morning bird? And this is a big deal because it tells me a little bit about what their adrenals are doing and how their cortisol is being released throughout the day. So there's this natural circadian rhythm that happens, and we know that the cortisol should be something that is decreasing at night so that we can sleep, but increased in the morning to help wake us up, keep us really cognitively sharp, and help us with our exercise. So we can modulate our cortisol with adaptogenic herbs, and then also lifestyle strategies for really keeping ourselves on a routine, on a schedule, having moments where we've scheduled in mindfulness and meditation to be really helpful to reduce our stress levels, which also affects directly how our adrenal glands and our cortisol is regulated.
So from the acupuncture and Chinese herbs perspective, in our practice here, we've got 3 doctors, and one of them is an acupuncturist who's also a naturopath and skilled in Chinese herbs. She wasn't able to make it today. Her name's Dr. Mary, but these are sort of her tips on how to diminish allergies from the traditional Chinese medicine perspective. And one of her formulas that she pulls from is known as the jade screen formula. It's full of these roots, these medicinal roots that are sort of processed and made into a powder, and it sort of decreases the inflammation in the body, moves the liver.
And she also wanted to make sure that we shared with you guys that when she's doing allergy acupuncture specifically, she's oftentimes needling those areas in the face that are affected by that excess mucus drainage. And so she said that it's quite satisfying to have people come in and have, be presenting with that sinus congestion and a lot of that discomfort, and then to be able to walk out and feel so much better, and like they've had so much movement through that. So I suppose that's that moving of that chi and supporting the circulation with that.
And
so this is yours, Dr. Rosalie.
From the Ayurvedic perspective, which is my sub focus, is in Ayurveda is that traditional medicine from India. It's sort of our constitutional medicine, what makes up our mind, body, and spirit. Okay. In Sanskrit, it means the science of life. So your everyday life choices end up leading to how balanced or imbalanced you are. In Ayurveda, it says the root cause of allergy is an imbalanced Agni, which is just this Sanskrit term that means digestive fire. So we're kind of coming back to the GI tract here. How well your stomach and your GI tract is digesting tells us about how likely you are to have allergy symptoms. There's 2 types of allergies, Kapha type and Pitta type. If you're familiar with Ayurveda, this makes sense to you. Kapha is just what's known as our water and earth elements. And so imagine water and earth type allergies, right? We're producing mucus. We've got postnasal drip, sneezing, stuffy nose, maybe a wet type of cough, right? This is very much water and earthy. It's typically in springtime that it comes out. And then Pitta is our fire, and then our also water in terms of a more liquid type of allergy comes out in the summer. So our hives, our itchy skin, even our headaches or eczema or weeping sores, that's more of our Pitta type of allergy. And then lastly, this slide just gives you some nice home remedies from the Ayurvedic perspective, which also makes sense from the naturopathic perspective. With cilantro juice, it's kind of our detoxifying herb, and it's cooling, right? So we're decreasing the Pitta type allergy here. So that's helpful for if you have an uptick in your allergy symptoms after you've been outside or around, some horses or animals. This is something that will really help soothe the symptoms. And then secondly is a licorice tea, which helps to neutralize the inflammation. And with that tea, since it's made from dry roots, you just want to make sure you boil it for at least 5 minutes to really extract all of the healthy constituents that are in the root.
So that concludes our time here today. We want to make sure to invite you guys for our next Doc Talk, which is going to be June 8th, so the second Tuesday in June. And that one's going to be all about balancing hormones and specifically menopause and andropause transitions. So please make sure to join us then. And we just want to remind you all that if you feel like you're doing everything right and you've really reduced your environmental exposures and your potential allergy exposures, and you feel like you've changed your diet and you're trying to take these anti-inflammatory herbs and you're still having issues, give us a call. Let's figure out what's going on for you. There's lots of testing that we can do, and there's just so many tools that we have in our tool belt, especially, not just having our traditional naturopathic model, but also being able to draw now from that Ayurvedic perspective, as well as the traditional Chinese medical model. There's just so much information out there that we're happy to share with you guys. If you have any questions, I don't see anything in the chat, but let's see. Yes, this was recorded. Great question, Shirley. Yeah, so yes, so we've recorded all of these on our website. There's an archive of these Doc Talks, which you're welcome to go back and listen to. We try to post them within 24 to 48 hours, and then we'll send you a replay link since you registered as well. We can do that. So we'll send you a replay link specifically to remind you. But thank you guys so much for joining us today. And if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and log off, and I hope you guys can enjoy the beautiful sunshiny days. Oh, thank you, Dr. Rosalie. So there's the link that she shared now in the chat that has all of our prior Doc Talks as well. And that's where you'll see this one posted as well.
Thank you all. Have a lovely
day. Thank you. Thank you so much.